This is a brief lecture on rhetoric and visual design. Chapter 17 in our textbook provides a variety of helpful tips for incorporating design into your writing projects. So I don't want to repeat the advice offered there, but rather focus on some conceptual aspects of design. I want to look at how visual rhetoric shapes meaning and hopefully provides some ideas about how incorporating visual elements can help you to achieve your purposes and to effectively communicate with your audience. And again, look at chapter 17 for some of the nuts and bolts stuff about how to arrange elements on a page, how to use different fonts, that sort of thing. So, but a little bit of background on how visuals make meaning. So, images can be powerful conveyors of perceived reality. Consider, for instance, this red state, blue state map of the United States. In this map, which is likely a familiar image to you, or at least some version of it is familiar to you. States are assigned one color based on the dominant 2008 presidential vote. So the states that primarily voted for McCain are red, those that primarily voted for Obama are blue. The assignment of one color to a state conveys a sense of divisiveness, that each state in the country is either firmly Republican or firmly Democrat. With a map colored this way, it's easy to assume that the country cannot effectively communicate because different parts of the country are so different from other parts. So this is another variation of the same data from the 2008 election. So this is coded, however, according to county rather than state. And with this shift, the map seems much more like shades of purple rather than distinctly red and blue. There are different colors, not just red and blue. There's variations, different types of purple. So the idea of divisiveness fades with this image. Both images are based on the same data, but choices about presentation change meaning. And in writing, visual elements can change how the same content is delivered. So, not only do images convey meanings and connotations, but so do typefaces or fonts. Your textbook provides a lot of good tips about how to use typefaces, so again, I don't want to reiterate what is said there, but I do want to quickly provide an illustration of how type can influence connotation or perceptions of meaning. So, look at the word house that's displayed here. What sort of house do you imagine when you look at this word in this typeface? And then what about the houses displayed here? What associations do you have with each? Maybe the first a castle, the second an abandoned house, and so on. If we compared our responses, they'd probably be similar, or at least there would be some overlap. And with the house on the previous screen, you likely didn't have many associations, or the associations were linked to your own experiences with a house. Maybe the house you live in now, or the house you grew up in. So the type in the previous screen was Times New Roman, which is the default type for many word processing programs, a typeface that we see often and in many contexts. Each of the typefaces on this page is used infrequently, and each conveys a unique association. As you use typefaces, you want to make sure that if you use a decorative or uncommon typeface like those here, that the associations attached to that typeface match with your overall purpose. So, what does this mean in terms of creating meaning with image? Playing with design elements of an image can help you to create meaningful contrasts and derivations. So, here's a Calvin Klein ad. Even if you haven't seen this particular ad, the black and white image, the Calvin Klein logo at the bottom of the page, the figure's stance and attire or lack of are all probably familiar to you. So then take a look at this image. This is a parody ad created by Adbusters, and I've included a link to them in web links. The message of the image is fairly straightforward, that most men are not going to achieve the sleek look advertised by Calvin Klein. Even if they purchase the company's products, reality is a thick belly and lots of hair. The image achieves its purpose because it builds directly off of the familiar Calvin Klein approach to design. You recognize the style of the image, so you are able to make immediate and meaningful associations. So, as another example, look at this Tommy Hilfiger ad. The figures are positioned in front of a large American flag. The fence and the grass suggest a farm or pastoral setting. The image reflects the concept of Tommy as the new American fragrance, as the tagline says. So here's another parody ad from Adbusters, and you'll notice the similarities, right? You have, visually it looks a lot the same, the flag, the pastoral. Here, though, instead of young men and women, you have sheep, and with them an argument against following the flock. In these two examples, the argument is made by applying familiar visual context and tweaking them to assert a new yet familiar perspective and association. We've been reading about the importance of circumstances in making rhetorical choices, and those circumstances, the context surrounding the writing, is just as important with images. So take a moment to look at this ad for Starbucks. If I told you that this ad was highly controversial, so much so that Starbucks eventually pulled the ad, could you tell me why? What if I tell you that the ad came out in early 2002? What if I remind you that this was only a few months after 9/11? Does the controversy make more sense now? The 2 cups of tea, pillars side by side, the dragonfly aimed at the cups, the word collapse. All of these elements created too strong of a link to the collapse of the Twin Towers. The circumstances surrounding a text, whether visual or verbal, have a strong impact on how the text will be read and received. Finally, I want to give you a few examples of effective and ineffective use of visual elements. And for our purposes, what I mean by ineffective design is design that fails to consider rhetorical concerns such as audience, purpose, and circumstances. Any design or visual elements you incorporate in your writing projects should reflect your overall purpose. So to illustrate texts that fail to link visual elements to a clear rhetorical purpose, I'd like to look at a couple of websites, and these websites were collected from webpages.suck.com, which is a helpful and often amusing collection of terrible web design, so it's worth exploring. Okay, so here is this website. And just look for a minute. What do you see about the way that design elements are incorporated? Consider the layout of the page. All you see is a list of links with no clear indication of what information is available or how to navigate that information. And there's no category of information. It's all just one long list. So the page's design doesn't take into account the circumstances of reading the web. Most web pages have some sort of navigation, either at the top of the page or the left, so that readers begin to expect these features. It's part of the genre of a web page. So without those elements, the text is less readable. And another obvious design flaw of this page is the color, and if you didn't notice the color, just scroll through the links and the color changes in a really distracting way. So, a second example. So, in this example, in some ways, it's more successful, more rhetorically effective than the example that we just looked at. Because you know really quickly what the company provides, uniforms, and you can pretty quickly get to the product that you need. So they have jackets, overcoats, etc. But there are a lot of things happening on here, a lot of different fonts, a lot of distracting animations like this right here. It's really busy. So it's more effective than the last one, but it's still sort of, the visual elements are getting in the way of the rhetorical purpose. And so that's something that you want to keep in mind. How do the visual elements incorporate with your overall purpose? So now I want to look at another example of visual design that's more effective in terms of achieving rhetorical purpose. So this is a health poster that was produced by the Works Progress Administration, which was a New Deal program that sought to provide work to artists and writers Posters were created about travel, art events, health, other topics. So the message of this poster is clear. If you get syphilis, be sure to seek early treatment. So the visual elements of the poster help to further assert this message. The 6 happy men who got treated early are moving in an upward direction. Their arms are raised. They have 1 foot off the ground, almost as if they're skipping. And they are all in white. The 4 figures who waited too long are moving downwards on the page with their arms hanging low and their feet firmly planted. They are also predominantly black figures. While this image is simple in many ways, it helps to illustrate how a few design choices can effectively affirm the purpose of a written text. So, these are just a few examples of how visual elements can help to convey a text's purpose. But I hope that you'll read chapter 17 carefully and start experimenting with visual elements in your writing. I don't expect you to have it all figured out right at the beginning, but just try a few things and see how they work and see what impact they have on your pieces.